So a 2-year investigation from the Basel Action Network, or BAN, has revealed that the toxic e-waste that we think is being responsibly recycled might be exported illegally to countries where it's sent to low-tech workshops and developing countries where it's often dismantled by children. Joining us to talk about this investigation is Lizzie Grossman, author of High Tech Trash, who wrote about this in The Intercept. Welcome, Lizzie.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. So what sparked this investigation by BAN?
Well, BAN had known for actually well over 10 years now that a large amount of the electronic equipment, computers and so forth that people send out for recycling in this country is being sent overseas to China, to Africa, to other countries in Southeast Asia, around the world, where, as you mentioned, it has often been either dumped or dismantled in these very low-tech workshops with open burning, acid baths, smashing things up and leaving them to pollute the environment. And even though this kind of export is technically not supposed to go on, it has been continuing. The U.S. actually does not have any law that completely prohibits this export. There's certain components that are not allowed to be exported. The big cathode ray tubes that have a lot of lead in them are considered hazardous waste if they're not being handled properly. But BAN knew that this trade was continuing and that the federal government doesn't really have any provisions for tracking it. So they got a grant and decided to stick 200 GPS-enabled tracking devices on equipment that they dropped off at publicly available drop-off sites around the country, most of them commercial recyclers, some at Goodwill shops and other thrift shops and retailers. And they tracked where these things have gone around the world.
Wow. So were these phones or computers or both?
There were some, I believe there were some mobile devices, but there were computer screens, monitors, and printers. And I can't remember the entire list, but included printers, flat screens, and some mobile devices, yes.
And so what did they find? We've already talked about how they've gone to some developing countries. Like, where were they going? Were they going directly to these developing countries? What did they find as they tracked it?
They actually, as I think you've got up on the screen now, BAN partnered up with an MIT project. I think it's called the Sensible City Lab that has created these visualizations. And as you can see, they kind of hopscotched around, made some stops on their way out of the country. And these devices don't always go from where they're dropped off to their final destination, because typically what happens is these devices are dismantled, taken apart. So the different kinds of materials, glass, plastic, metals, can be reused, and those are different components get sent on to different places. And what BAN was able to do with these tracking devices is follow them kind of step by step on their travels, both through the country and then when they went overseas.
Is this a matter of kind of the middleman kind of problem? Like, I have to imagine a lot of the organizations that are doing this, like it's either happening and they're fully complicit with it, or maybe it's happening and they aren't necessarily directly sending to these places, but they're passing it through a middleman, and that kind of absolves them of having to be more concerned about it. Is that a piece of what's going on here by chance?
That's a huge part of what's been happening, because most recyclers aren't completely equipped to handle all these different materials. So they typically sell this stuff on, they pass it on to what gets referred to as downstream partners or downstream companies. And a really good, responsible recycler will actually make sure they know where this stuff is going every step of the way. But very often, companies don't ask or they don't know. And I can't possibly generalize for all of them, but that exactly what you're describing has been a huge part of the problem, that people just don't know where the stuff is going.
Mm-hmm.
So you wrote your book, High Tech Trash, in 2006, and you have a second edition that you wrote. I mean, what's changed as you've been covering this.
I mean, 2006 was before like the crazy boom that we've had in smartphones.
Exactly. It's a long time ago. And some things have changed a lot. When I first started working on the book, when I asked retailers or big manufacturers about recycling equipment, very few of them had programs up and running. Retailers had no idea what to do with this stuff. Most cities and states had no programs for electronics recycling and no bans on landfill. So that stuff has changed a lot. And there weren't these certification programs for recyclers to work with that make them pledge to uphold certain standards. None of that existed. So a lot has changed, but at the same time, we're still exporting this stuff to where labor is cheap. And as apparently right now, prices of the materials are not fetching high prices. So everybody's looking for really cheap labor costs. And that hasn't changed at all, unfortunately.
Well, you write that the EPA says the U.S. generates 3.14 million tons of e-waste, but yet there's no e-waste law. Is that something that you see happening anytime soon?
You know, I have no idea. Really what happened in the past 10 years is that states stepped in because it's local governments, for the most part, that handle solid waste regulations, and what you can put in your trash wherever you live and what can go to the dump, that's handled locally. And I'm sort of beyond the scope of what I can estimate as to why this hasn't happened, but we don't have a national law. And the other thing that hasn't happened is that the U.S. is one of the few countries in the world that hasn't ratified an international treaty that prevents the export of hazardous waste from richer to poorer countries that would help stop this kind of export.
Well, are there any questions that people can ask when they bring their e-waste to a recycler? Is there anything that like an average person can do to hope that it's going to a safer place than what you talk about?
I think one of the things that people can do is take their used equipment back to the manufacturer, use the manufacturer's recycling program, because one of the big principles that people like Ban and others who've been working in this as environmental advocates have been pushing is responsible design and making the producers have some real sort of stake in what happens to the used equipment. So it's also a big brand thing. If you take your computer back to one of the big name manufacturers, it looks really bad for them if something goes wrong. If you take it to, corner recycler, not such a big deal.
That's interesting that you say that. I've just never been that aware that you could do that. Owen, is this kind of something that you were even aware existed, that you could send your old electronics back to like the creators of that technology and have them do something useful with it?
Yeah, you can do that. Apple has a very active recycling program. In fact, I talked to them for this story, but there wasn't room to put it in. They've just developed some kind of robot that can take apart cell phones for recycling.
Oh, that's right. Well, yes.
Liam, the recycling robot.
Dell, HP, Samsung, they all have active recycling programs, and they're not well advertised.
Yeah,
they're not that easy to use sometimes. And there's the whole data security question and getting your stuff off your devices that kind of stops people, but they all have programs.
Oh, and did you know about this?
I know about everything. Yeah,
of course you do. Of course.
First of all, the rage in my heart, because you see on 60 Minutes, there's been so many stories about kids that live on these trash computer islands where they're just walking across floating computers and keyboards and like that. So Lord knows we know that things aren't always getting recycled the way they are. But to your question about stores, one of the major places you could take your things to be recycled is Best Buy. I know we order everything. Everybody who knows anything about tech orders everything off Amazon, gets it to your house. But if you go into a Best Buy store, right in the front, they have like a 3 or 4 section bin, and it'll say like keyboard, monitor, computer, whatever. And if you take it in, they'll actually wipe your computer if it's still active. If it's dead, they won't do anything for it. They'll just say, put it down and we'll recycle it. So that's like the place where I take my recycling. And they also do promotional things where like, bring in any tablet. It could be broken or dead or whatever, and they'll give you $25 off the purchase of a new tablet or something like that. They run those promotions all the time. So that's why when people ask me to recycle stuff, I always just tell them to go to Best Buy.
I guess
that's a big enough brand that I assume hopefully
I mean,
they're supposed to do.
Well, and I mean, I guess that's the clincher right there is that, we assume that it's happening the way that they say it is. How do we know? Like, how are we?
As she was saying, larger brands, like that would not look really good on Apple or a Best Buy or an HP. Like that's a major company. And if you're telling me to bring me my stuff to recycle it, I expect you to be doing the right thing. And you're making a pretty penny, you should be able to do it. And again, a lot of the things they offer, so a lot of things they offer you is to get you to spend more money. So I assume that they're using that little bit of money to advocate and hopefully do the right thing. If you bring in an old Xbox or something like that, they give you like $35 towards the purchase of a game or something like that. Like everything always has some kind of exchange program where they give you just enough money to spend in the store to where you buy something outrageously priced. You know what I mean? But a lot of things have those like little values to them. So that's where I go.
But Lizzie, you mentioned that one of the places they followed was Goodwill, right? I mean, Goodwill was one of these places that you thought the recycling was going somewhere and it wasn't.
Right, and that's and Goodwill, Dell has been a partner with Goodwill for quite some time, and it's not every single Goodwill store, but quite a number of Goodwill stores. I think it's called Dell Reconnect or Dell Connect, and some of the trackers that Dan put on devices that they dropped off at Goodwill did end up overseas, and I don't know if Dell has had a chance to fully respond to this yet. They hadn't by the time I contacted them, but I would assume they are going to be responding and looking into this.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Lizzie Grossman is a freelance journalist. This piece is in The Intercept. We'll have a link in the show notes. You can read the entire piece, and then also links to the ban research and also I think a PBS special about this if you want to learn more. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.